The conflict between Israel and Palestine is, for Christians, a spiritual war that's been raging for millennia, rooted in ancient prophecies and divine promises. For politicians, it's an age-old territorial and nationalist struggle. But no matter which lens you look through, the conflict is one of the most enduring and complicated disputes in human history. Today, we'll dive into the origins of this enmity, examining biblical events, prophecies, and the real-world developments that have shaped this bitter rivalry. The roots of the Israel-Palestine conflict trace back thousands of years to the Bible's account of Abraham and his two sons, Isaac and Ishmael. Abraham, considered the patriarch of both Jews and Arabs, was promised by God that his descendants would inherit the land of Canaan, as described in Genesis 12, 1-3. However, the story of who would inherit this promise is where the divide begins. Abraham had two sons, Ishmael, born to Hagar, an Egyptian slave, and Isaac, born to his wife Sarah in their old age. According to the Bible, God's covenant would be passed through Isaac and his descendants, making Isaac the father of Jacob, whose descendants became the Israelites. This divine promise of land and blessing to Isaac and his descendants is central to the Jewish claim to the land of Israel, as outlined in Genesis 17 and 19-21. But Ishmael also received a blessing from God. In Genesis 16, 10-12, God promised that Ishmael would become the father of a great nation. Ishmael's descendants are traditionally understood to be the Arab people, which includes the Palestinians. This ancestral division sets the stage for the conflict, as both Jews and Arabs claim Abraham as their forefather and see the land of Canaan as part of their heritage. The heart of the Israel-Palestine conflict is the claim to the land of Israel, which both sides consider their rightful homeland. For Jews, the land is not just a place to live, it's a fulfillment of a divine promise. God's covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob includes the land of Canaan, modern-day Israel and Palestine, as an everlasting inheritance for their descendants, as stated in Genesis 15, 18-21. This promise is reaffirmed throughout the Old Testament, particularly in God's covenants with Moses and King David. The Bible also speaks of the restoration of Israel in the end times, with prophecies in Ezekiel 37 and Isaiah 66 describing a future where Israel is regathered from exile and restored to its land. These prophecies were seen by many as being fulfilled in 1948, when Israel became a nation after nearly 2,000 years of exile following the horrors of the Holocaust. For Palestinians, many of whom trace their lineage to Ishmael and view themselves as descendants of the ancient Canaanites and other peoples of the region, the land is their ancestral home as well. They have lived in the region for centuries, and their connection to the land runs deep. This tension over land ownership creates a complex and emotionally charged dispute that goes beyond mere politics. It touches on identity, faith, and historical rights. The establishment of the State of Israel in 1948 marks one of the most pivotal and controversial moments in modern Middle Eastern history. It was a moment of jubilation for the Jewish people, symbolizing the fulfillment of ancient prophecies and the restoration of their homeland after centuries of exile. But for Palestinians, this moment signified the beginning of an enduring displacement and loss, sparking what they call the Nakba, the catastrophe. To grasp the significance of 1948, we must first understand the factors that led to the creation of the State of Israel. The modern conflict between Jews and Arabs in Palestine began to take shape in the late 19th century with the rise of the Zionist movement. Founded by Theodor Herzl in 1897, Zionism advocated for the establishment of a Jewish homeland in response to centuries of persecution, including pogroms in Eastern Europe and Russia. Palestine at that time was under Ottoman control and home to a predominantly Arab Muslim population with smaller Christian and Jewish communities. However, the Zionist movement viewed Palestine as the historic homeland of the Jewish people, based on biblical claims and historical ties to the land of Israel. From the early 1900s, Jewish immigration to Palestine increased steadily, fueled by Zionist aspirations and the growing dangers Jews faced in Europe. This immigration was further accelerated by the Balfour Declaration of 1917, in which the British government expressed its support for the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. The declaration, while welcomed by Jews, sowed the seeds of conflict with the Arab inhabitants of the region. They viewed the declaration as a betrayal by the British, who had previously promised Arab independence in exchange for support against the Ottoman Empire during World War I. After the defeat of the Ottomans in 1918, Britain was given control over Palestine under a League of Nations mandate, a move that formalized its role in administering the region. During this period, Jewish immigration and land purchases continued to increase, resulting in growing tensions between Jews and Arabs throughout the 1920s and 1930s. These tensions escalated into sporadic violence between Jewish and Arab communities in Palestine. Both groups felt a deep attachment to the land, and the competing nationalist movements, Zionism for Jews and Arab nationalism for Palestinians, began to clash more openly. In the 1930s, as Jewish immigration surged, particularly due to the rise of Nazi Germany, Palestinian Arabs grew increasingly alarmed. Many Palestinians feared that the growing Jewish population would soon dominate the land, leading to calls for limits on immigration and Jewish land purchases. These fears reached a boiling point during the Arab Revolt of 1936 to 1939, a widespread uprising against both the British administration and Jewish communities. The revolt was violently suppressed by the British, but it deepened Palestinian resentment and strengthened the Jewish community's desire for self-defense. The tragic events of World War II and the Holocaust added urgency to the Zionist cause. The systematic extermination of 6 million Jews by Nazi Germany left the surviving Jewish population determined to create a homeland where they could live safely and free from persecution. For many Jews, Palestine was the only place that could serve as this refuge. After the war, tens of thousands of Jewish refugees, many of them Holocaust survivors, sought to immigrate to Palestine. However, the British, facing increasing Arab opposition and their own geopolitical challenges, imposed limits on Jewish immigration. This led to Jewish paramilitary organizations like the Haganah, Irgun and Lehi launching violent campaigns against British forces, demanding an end to immigration restrictions and British rule. The British, exhausted from the war and unable to manage the growing violence, referred the issue of Palestine to the newly formed United Nations in 1947. In response to the rising violence between Jews and Arabs, the United Nations proposed a solution, the Partition Plan of 1947. The plan aimed to divide Palestine into two separate states, one Jewish and one Arab, with Jerusalem placed under international administration due to its religious significance to Jews, Christians and Muslims alike. According to the UN Partition Plan, 55% of the land would be allocated to the Jewish state, 45% to the Arab state, and Jerusalem would remain under international control. For Jews, who had long dreamed of a homeland, the partition plan was a victory, even though many felt that the land allocated to them was too small and fragmented. For Palestinians and the Arab world, the partition plan was seen as deeply unjust. At the time, Jews constituted only about 30% of the population and owned less than 10% of the land in Palestine, yet the plan gave them a majority of the territory, including some areas with large Arab populations. The Arab leadership rejected the Partition Plan outright, viewing it as a colonialist imposition that violated the rights of the indigenous Arab population. They believed that all of Palestine should be an Arab state and that the growing Jewish presence was an illegitimate colonization project. Jewish leaders, led by David Ben Gurion, accepted the plan with reservations, seeing it as the best opportunity to achieve statehood, even though it did not give them control over Jerusalem. On May 14, 1948, as the British mandate in Palestine came to an end, David Ben Gurion declared the establishment of the State of Israel. The next day, armies from 5 neighboring Arab nations, Egypt, Jordan, Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon, invaded the new state, aiming to crush it before it could take root. This was the beginning of the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, known in Israel as the War of Independence and to Palestinians as the Nakba, Arabic for catastrophe. While Israel fought for its survival, the consequences for the Palestinians were devastating. During the war, over 700,000 Palestinians were displaced, either fleeing their homes out of fear or being forcibly expelled by Israeli forces. Entire Palestinian villages were depopulated, and many were razed to the ground. These refugees fled to neighboring countries, Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, and Egypt, or to the West Bank and Gaza Strip. The causes of this mass displacement are still hotly debated. Israeli historians argue that many Palestinians fled voluntarily, anticipating a swift Arab victory, while Palestinian scholars emphasize the expulsions carried out by Jewish militias during military campaigns such as Plan Dalet, which aimed to secure the borders of the new state. Regardless of the causes, the result was the same: an enormous population of stateless Palestinians and a deep sense of injustice that has fueled the conflict for decades. The 1949 armistice agreements, which ended the war, left Israel in control of 78% of historic Palestine. The remaining territories, the West Bank, including East Jerusalem and the Gaza Strip, were controlled by Jordan and Egypt, respectively, until the 1967 Six-Day War, when Israel captured these areas. The Nakba is not just a historical event for Palestinians, it is the defining trauma of their national identity. The displacement of 1948 created a Palestinian refugee crisis that persists to this day, with millions of Palestinians living in refugee camps in neighboring Arab countries, in the West Bank and Gaza, or scattered across the globe. The right of return, the demand that Palestinian refugees and their descendants be allowed to return to the homes they fled or were expelled from in 1948, remains one of the core issues of the Israel-Palestine conflict. For Palestinians, 1948 represents the loss of their homeland, the destruction of their society, and the beginning of their statelessness. Every year on May 15th, Palestinians commemorate Nakba Day, mourning the loss of their land and demanding recognition of their rights. The memory of the Nakba is a source of deep resentment and fuels the desire for justice, restitution, and statehood. The events of 1948 laid the foundation for the modern Israel-Palestine conflict. The establishment of Israel and the displacement of the Palestinian people created two opposing national narratives, one of triumph and restoration for Jews, and one of catastrophe and dispossession for Palestinians. These competing historical memories have shaped the collective identities of both peoples and have made the path to peace extraordinarily difficult. The Nakba remains at the heart of the Palestinian demand for self-determination, justice, and the right of return, while for Israelis, the War of 1948 symbolizes the fulfillment of a 2,000-year-old dream to return to their ancestral homeland and build a sovereign state. The legacy of 1948 continues to cast a long shadow over every attempt to resolve the conflict, with both sides seeing the events of that year as critical to understanding their present-day struggles. The Six-Day War of 1967 is one of the most decisive and transformative events in the modern Middle East, reshaping the geopolitical landscape of the region and laying the groundwork for the ongoing Israel-Palestine conflict. For Israel, the war resulted in a swift, overwhelming victory that expanded its territory and solidified its position in the region. For the Palestinians and neighboring Arab states, the war marked the beginning of an extended Israeli occupation of the West Bank, East Jerusalem, Gaza Strip, and Golan Heights, a source of enduring conflict and international tension. The consequences of this brief but intense war have reverberated throughout the decades, influencing the political, social, and spiritual dimensions of the conflict. The Six-Day War did not arise out of a vacuum, but was the culmination of escalating tensions between Israel and its neighboring Arab states, Egypt, Jordan, Syria, and Iraq, following the creation of Israel in 1948. These tensions were heightened by several key factors. The 1948 Arab-Israeli War, known to Israelis as the War of Independence and to Palestinians as the Nakba catastrophe, had left deep scars. Arab states, particularly Egypt, Jordan, and Syria, refused to recognize Israel's right to exist and remained committed to reversing the outcomes of 1948. Arab nationalism, spearheaded by Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser, aimed at uniting Arab states against Israel. The 1948 war left unresolved territorial disputes, particularly over the West Bank controlled by Jordan, Gaza controlled by Egypt, and the Golan Heights, part of Syria. In the years leading up to the Six-Day War, there were frequent skirmishes and border clashes between Israel and its neighbors, with tensions growing over control of these areas. Another precursor to the Six-Day War was the Suez Crisis of 1956, in which Israel, in coordination with Britain and France, invaded Egypt following Nasser's nationalization of the Suez Canal. Although Israel withdrew under international pressure, the war deepened animosity between Israel and Egypt and laid the groundwork for future conflict. The Cold War rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union also played a role. The Arab states, particularly Egypt and Syria, were supported by the Soviet Union, while Israel, despite receiving international arms and economic support from various countries, increasingly became aligned with the United States and Western powers. In May 1967, Nasser escalated the conflict by closing the Straits of Tiran to Israeli shipping, effectively blockading Israel's port of Eilat and cutting off vital maritime access to the Red Sea. Israel viewed this as an act of war, and international efforts to mediate the situation failed, faced with increasing threats from its neighbors, Egypt, Syria, Jordan, and Iraq, and the military mobilization of Arab forces along its borders. Israel felt surrounded and vulnerable. On June 5, 1967, Israel launched a preemptive strike against Egypt, marking the start of the Six-Day War. Israel's Air Force led the offensive, launching Operation Focus, a meticulously planned surprise attack that destroyed the majority of Egypt's Air Force while it was still on the ground. This left Egypt's military crippled and ensured Israel's air superiority throughout the conflict. Over the next 6 days, Israel fought on multiple fronts against Egypt, Jordan, and Syria, achieving stunning victories. By the end of the war on June 10, 1967, Israel had captured the Sinai Peninsula and Gaza Strip from Egypt, seized control of the West Bank and East Jerusalem from Jordan, and captured the Golan Heights from Syria. Israel had tripled the size of its territory in just 6 days, changing the region's political map dramatically. The capture of East Jerusalem, including the Old City and sites sacred to Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, had profound religious and political significance. The victory was celebrated in Israel as a miracle, cementing the state's military prowess in the region. The Six-Day War created a new reality. Israel now controlled significant Arab populations in the West Bank, Gaza Strip, and East Jerusalem, beginning what is known as the Israeli occupation of these territories. Israel's capture of the West Bank and Gaza brought over 1 million Palestinians under Israeli military rule. This occupation has been one of the most contentious issues in the Israel-Palestine conflict, as Palestinians in these territories seek independence and the establishment of a Palestinian state. The occupation remains a point of deep international concern, particularly with the expansion of Israeli settlements in the West Bank. The capture of East Jerusalem and its unification with West Jerusalem was perhaps the most symbolic victory for Israel. The Western Wall, the holiest site in Judaism, came under Israeli control for the first time in nearly 2,000 years. However, for Palestinians and the broader Arab world, the loss of East Jerusalem was a major blow, as the city is also home to the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock, two of the holiest sites in Islam. The capture of the Golan Heights from Syria has remained a strategic military advantage for Israel, providing a buffer zone against potential attacks from the north. However, the Syrian government continues to demand its return, making the Golan a key point of contention in Israeli-Syrian relations. The war exacerbated the Palestinian refugee crisis. Hundreds of thousands of Palestinians fled or were displaced from the newly occupied territories, adding to the already significant number of refugees created during the 1948 Nakba. These displaced Palestinians have never been allowed to return, fueling resentment and further complicating peace efforts. Israel's victory in the Six-Day War was a result of not only its military strategy, but also the support and backing of various international allies. While Israel's primary military backer was the United States, other Western countries played key roles in providing funding, weapons, and diplomatic backing. Although the US did not directly engage in the Six-Day War, it provided critical military and financial support to Israel in the lead-up to the conflict. US policy in the Middle East during the 1960s was shaped by the Cold War rivalry with the Soviet Union. With the Soviet Union backing Arab states like Egypt and Syria, the US saw Israel as a strategic ally in the region. The US provided Israel with a wide array of military equipment, including aircraft, tanks, and artillery, as well as financial aid. The Israeli Air Force, which played a decisive role in the war, was equipped with American-made aircraft, including French Mirage jets and American F4 Phantom jets. The US also provided diplomatic cover for Israel at the United Nations. While the US called for a ceasefire during the war, it did not prevent Israel from achieving its objectives. Prior to the Six-Day War, France was Israel's most important arms supplier. France played a significant role in building Israel's military capabilities during the 1950s and early 1960s, including selling Mirage III fighter jets, which were pivotal in achieving air superiority. The Six-Day War's impact extended far beyond the immediate territorial changes. It reshaped the Middle East's power dynamics, weakening Arab nationalism and boosting Israel's confidence as a regional power. Globally, it intensified Cold War divisions, with the US and Soviet Union deepening their involvements. The ongoing occupation has led to decades of unrest, including intifadas, peace talks, and international resolutions, yet peace remains elusive. The war's legacy underscores the fragility of borders, the weight of historical grievances, and the human cost of unresolved conflicts. Reflecting on this history, we see how ancient promises and modern ambitions collide, creating cycles of hope and despair. The Israel-Palestine conflict teaches us the dangers of ignoring deep-rooted identities and the need for empathy in pursuit of justice. As the world watches, the question remains, Can dialogue bridge what force has divided, or will the shadows of the past continue to shape an uncertain future?